The iron industry changes. Looking now at the iron industry changes. So originally, smoke and fumes from coal burning meant coal couldn't be substituted for charcoal in smelting iron. So originally, smoke and fumes from coal burning meant coal could not be substituted for charcoal in smelting iron. So smoke and fumes from coal burning meant coal couldn't be substituted for charcoal in smelting iron. In 1710, iron makers began to use coke, which was smokeless, hot-burning fuel that was produced by heating coal to get rid of its water and impurities. So coke became the main fuel source by the early 1700s, which was smokeless and hot-burning fuel that was produced by heating coal to get rid of its water and impurities. So it's like a kind of a purified version of coal almost.
Coal couldn't be substituted for what?
So for basically they had to keep using charcoal for a long time because the coal had too much fumes and smoke. So eventually they were able to use coal by converting it into coke, which is when they took out the impurities and took out the water. So basically it's kind of like you had to process the coal first, turn it into coke, then you could use it to go melt your iron and whatnot. I don't believe. I think it's from the type of plant it comes from. After 1770, steam-driven bellows are like those giant like wind-producing things or air-producing things. By 1770, steam-driven bellows added into blast furnaces allowed for great increases of quantity of pig iron made in Britain. So after 1770, steam-driven bellows added into blast furnaces allowed for great increases of quantity of pig iron. So after 1770, steam-driven bellows added into blast furnaces allowed for great increases in quantity of pig iron in Britain. Pig iron. Henry Court, this guy over here, Henry Court made a puddling furnace in the 1780s, which allowed pig iron to be refined with coke. So Henry Court, this guy right here, makes a puddling, and you can see the word puddler up there, makes a puddling furnace in the 1780s, which allowed pig iron to be refined with coke. Which is why you often see a lot of people who deal with iron called puddlers. So people who deal with the refining of iron or melting of iron are referred to as puddlers. So in iron production, the iron workers, or puddlers, so in iron production, the iron workers, the puddlers, would cook molten pig iron into a great vat. So they basically melt down the pig iron to a great vat of metal. They would rake off the globs of refined iron into further processing. So they would melt it down and rake off the good iron to be used for further processing. Huh? Well, they try to remove impurities as they were working, I guess is my point. So once this was melted down and they took out the best iron they could, it could then be shaped into any kind of mold you had. So you would have different types of molds built to make whatever you might need, parts or rails or whatever the case is. So iron was then cooled into these molds to make different types of machines or parts or whatever was needed. So all this helped lead to a great boom in the iron industry in Britain. So by the late 1700s, you're going through a big iron boom in Great Britain. So here's a stat for you. In 1740, Britain annually made 17,000 tons of iron. So in 1740, Britain annually made 17,000 tons of iron. By 1806, they hit 260,000 tons. So by 1806, they hit 260,000 tons. So by 1806, they hit 260,000 tons. And by 1844, they hit 3 million. And this is like, these are two of the big ways that Britain becomes so dominant. Textiles and iron producing. Iron producing, not what? Not steel yet, right? So we're not to steel yet. And I would maybe kind of have that down. Like the first phase of the Industrial Revolution is all about mass producing iron, not steel yet. That's going to be what process? Bessemer process later on, right? But that doesn't hit till 1850s. So right now, earlier Industrial Revolution is all about mass producing iron. So iron now becomes cheap, basic, and indispensable. So because iron becomes so available in Great Britain and so cheap to buy, now you can use it for virtually anything. So that's another big effect of this, is that now iron can be used for development of different machines, or for buildings, or for railroads, locomotives, all, basically help industrial expansion. But we're not to steel yet. Steel comes later on. Yeah.
Can you kind of go back to Henry Court?
Henry Court was a guy who made a puddling furnace in the 1780s, which allowed pig iron to be refined with coke. So he basically makes a big improvement in iron making. Is all you really need to know. That's it. Questions about iron making? Everybody's good? Okay. I'm sorry I can't further train you in how to make these things with machines themselves. Okay. All right. Now we go into steam power transportation. So, the coal industry had long used plank roads and rails to move wagons through mines. So they had put planks down in mines, they had made rails across them, because they had iron. And they would have these little wagons that go back and forth throughout the mines, dragging coal in and out. But they were all moved by what?
People.
By people. They used rails and rail carts because rails reduced friction and allowed heavier loads to be pushed or pulled. So you could basically move more by putting it in this cart. But then someone was like, what if we take that engine and throw it on this cart and maybe it'll move it by itself? Right? So you get a what? A steam locomotive. So this is what it would look like first. Like, well, this is one of the first locomotives right here, right? This is a little steam engine on wheels, right, that would pull or push these these little carts. So the first steam locomotive was built by Richard. What's his name? Okay. Oh, why did I not have that? That's weird. Okay, Richard Trevithick was the guy who makes the first locomotive. But he's not the guy you really need to be aware of. So why he makes the first one, the guy who gets the bigger glory or the bigger notoriety is George Stephenson. When George Stephenson makes his rocket steam engine,
I was about to say, he's making rockets now.
So he creates this locomotive called Rocket, and that's the one that becomes famous. So that's why he gets a lot more notoriety. So George Stephenson's will become the more well-known locomotive maker with making Rocket. Rocket will bring a train car from Manchester to Liverpool at about 35 miles per hour in the 1820s. Whoa. So Rocket brought a train, or this locomotive, from Manchester to Liverpool at about 35 miles per hour in the 1820s. So basically, again, the locomotive develops out of necessity. Coal miners use it first because it helps to transport goods back and forth out the mines. And so other companies begin to see the usefulness of having a locomotive and a train, and so they begin to adapt it as well too. But basically, railroads and locomotive-powered machines or trains don't really start to happen until early 1800s. Within 20 years of the 1820s, the main trunk lines of Britain were completed. So like the main lines connecting the main cities, London, Manchester, Liverpool, all these different areas, Bristol. Within 20 years, the main trunk lines of Britain were completed. And so, essentially the same thing happens everywhere else. Everybody else sees, like, oh, yeah, Britain has this great transportation network within it. You don't need what anymore now to be built? You don't need canals anymore because that's way more expensive. So other countries begin to adopt the same thing. France, Germany do fairly quickly. America does about the same time in the 1820s and 30s. Brazil, Chile, Argentina, a lot of British colonies, they all begin to adopt railway lines because they see how efficient it can be. All right, the effects of the locomotive. So the arrival of the railroad dramatically reduced the cost and uncertainty of shipping freight over land. So that was always the biggest issue, is that it was hard to move things over land. Roads weren't reliable. It could get broken down or it could be stolen or taken. But now with railroads, you have a very fast and efficient way to transport basically as much goods as you want. You can load up as much stuff as you want and it can be moved around. And so if you can easily transfer goods around without having to rely on water, it also opens up new markets. We mentioned that in U.S. history too last year, that basically if you produce an item in Liverpool, you probably can't really sell in Liverpool, or you have to put it on a ship and sell it somewhere else. But with a railroad, it just opens up more markets to you, more cities you can sell to. So that's the other impact there as well, is that more train network means more markets to sell your products. So this also, if transportation is now cheaper, that means what happens to the price of these other products too? They go down too. They become cheaper as well. And because things can be transported easier, it made people like the cottage workers and the urban artisans have more severe pressure on them, like more competitive pressure. Because like the mills or the factories could use trains to transport their goods and make their products even cheaper and sell to wider areas. Because like if you're an artisan or a cottage guy before, you probably sold in your area. But now I can be somebody from across the country, and now I can be a competitor too in your same town, right? So in all countries, railroads led to a demand for unskilled labor and growth of urban working class too. So that's another effect, is that it leads to more workers. That now you need people who operate the trains, to work in train yards or work in train railways. So it does generate more of a working class as well. We'll stop.